Mr. Schiff.
Thank you. My name is Peter Schiff, and I guess you can say I am in the economic and financial gloom and doom business. And thanks to this body, President Obama, the Federal Reserve, business is booming. And, you know, I would rather profit from America's success rather than her failure, which is the reason that I'm here today. We have some serious structural problems underlying the U.S. economy, and we cannot solve them until we understand them. As a nation, we have borrowed and spent our way into a gigantic ditch. We are not going to get out of the ditch by digging it deeper. We have to reverse the mistakes of the past, not repeat them. Government stimulus will never grow this economy. It will never create jobs. It is the equivalent of trying to put out a fire by pouring gasoline on it. We have to understand that the housing bubble, the financial crisis of 2008, two events that I predicted and warned about, were the consequences of government stimulus. We stimulated our way into this problem. We're not going to stimulate our way out. In fact, the stimulus is actually a sedative. The stimulus is preventing the free market from unraveling the problems that years of bad monetary and fiscal policy have created. We don't need more spending. We need the opposite of spending. We need underconsumption. What the economy lacks is savings, investment, production. And if we try to preserve the jobs of the bubble economy with more reckless money printing and borrowing and government spending, all we are going to succeed in doing is preventing the restructuring that we need and preventing more productive jobs from ever coming into existence. And I want to talk, specifically about jobs. I'm an employer. I employ about 150 people. I would probably employ 1,000 more if it weren't for government regulations that have inhibited my ability to hire and grow my business and have forced me to move portions of my business overseas in order to escape the regulatory burden here. But the question is, why do I hire people? Where are these jobs coming from? Jobs in a free market, they come from two things. They come from profits or the profit motive, and they come from capital. You need both to create jobs. And in a free market, there's going to be jobs. And if there aren't enough jobs, Congress has to ask, what are we doing to inhibit this process? How are we preventing jobs that would normally be here from coming into existence? Now, in order for me to hire somebody, I have to be able to make a profit. That means that the person I hire has to deliver to me more value than the cost of employing them. And the cost of employing them is not just the wages I pay them, but it's all the mandatory benefits, the taxes, and more importantly, the legal liability that I incur when I hire somebody. In fact, one of the riskiest things you can do in America is to hire somebody. And because of that reason, because of all the liability from government, from lawsuits that you have put on employers, most small businesses, their main concern is how not to hire people. How can I grow my business and hire as few people as possible? That is not something that happens in the market. That is something that happens as a consequence of government. The other thing that you need to create jobs, in addition to profit, is capital. People work for me because I have capital. I have tools that my employees lack. They come to work, I give them an office, I give them secretarial support, I give them computers, I give them leads, I give them a brand, I give them all sorts of things. But where does capital come from? It comes from savings. It comes from underconsumption. Either I have to save it myself or I have to borrow it from somebody else. But there is no money to borrow because it's all going to government or something that government guarantees, like education or home mortgages. There is no credit available for small businesses. It's actually a paradox, but what we need is higher interest rates. Higher interest rates encourage savings. These low interest rates are of no benefit to typical businesses. Yeah, it benefits government. Government can borrow all this money through the bond market. Some of the major corporations have access to cheap money. Wall Street can gamble with it. But small businesses, they can't sell bonds. They need to borrow money, and there's no savings available. There is nothing there. So businesses can't get capital, and there is no incentive now to hire because the costs are too high. You're looking at somebody who's sitting here who was actually fined, and I'd be happy to talk my experience. I was fined $15,000 by security regulators because I hired too many people. Because I hired too many people, I incurred over $500,000 in legal bills defending myself because I hired too many people. Because I hired too many people, I've been on a hiring freeze ordered by regulators for 3 years. They have not let me hire people. They have not let me open new offices, despite the fact that I was dying to do it. I had plenty of demand. My business was growing, unfortunately, thanks to what you guys were doing. But regulators prohibited me from doing this. And there's all sorts of ways that rules and regulations have inhibited my business. In fact, it's now so expensive. I started my securities firm in 1996. There is no way that I could have started that firm today. I have an entire compliance department. It costs me millions of dollars a year just to stay in business, just to comply with rules and regulations that are not doing anything to protect my customers.
Thank you, Mr. Schiff. We appreciate that good testimony. Thank you. Dr. Boucher.
Well, I want to make 3 quick points. First, on the issue of regulations, I think we need to be very careful that we're very specific about what we're talking about. In today's New York Times, for example, there was an article about whether or not the FDA would regulate new forms of E. coli in our hamburgers. Now, that creates a level playing field, so every producer knows that everyone else needs to make sure that they're not allowing hazardous foods. That's an important regulation, and certainly it costs businesses money, but that's important for consumer health. I don't know when I see that hamburger what's inside of it. That's critical. So this sort of blanket regulatory stuff, we need to dig down deep into that. Second, we had an over 8% drop in GDP because of the crisis. That is a massive hole to fill. And I concur with my colleagues over here that, it may have been that the housing bubble was at an elevated level of demand flowing through the economy because of the housing bubble, but that doesn't change the fact that when you pull it out of the economy, you have a gaping hole, and that's left 14 million people out of work. It is that hole that government spending is the only entity right now can fill, unless we're going to dramatically increase our experts. Very quickly, my third point, around this uncertainty question, certainly, there's always uncertainty in an economy, but I think we should have been asking ourselves in the early 2000s how we were going to pay for those massive tax cuts that we did when we were also having 2 unfunded wars. I didn't hear as much discussion around that then, but those are the kinds of questions we should have been asking, and a part of why we're here today. Thank you.
Mr. Schiff.
Sure. Well, first of all, demand doesn't come from government spending. Inflation comes from government spending. Demand comes from supply. You can't consume something that isn't produced. So we have to make things first. But as far as regulations are concerned, certainly we need to stop piling new regulations on top of the existing regulations. But more importantly, we got to start repealing a lot of the rules and regulations that are already in place. Look, there are millions of Americans that are unemployed. How do we increase the demand for labor? It's simple. You bring down the cost of labor. Regulations substantially increase the cost of employing people, and as a result, fewer people are employed. I mean, there are simple things you can do, from getting rid of the minimum wage law, which you can do this afternoon, which would create millions of jobs, and more importantly, help people get trained for much higher paying jobs in the future. Right now, they're never going to get jobs. But the regulations that increase labor costs and that subject employers to all sorts of lawsuits if they don't create jobs in precisely the manner that some bureaucrat thinks they should be created. You have to level the playing field between employers and employees. You can't lose your rights because you hire somebody. You can't give workers some kind of special privilege and then call it a workers' rights. Workers don't have special rights because they get a job. Everybody has individual rights, and you shouldn't lose them because you hire somebody.
Thank you, Mr. Lindsay.
Say, wait a minute, let's get this right. China's about to build 100 airports, and we're spending less than 0.5% on our infrastructure? Something's wrong.
But I would love to address some of the points that Mr. Cummings made.
Make it real quick if you could, Mr. Schiff, because I want to get to.
Well, he made so many points, but you're right about one thing, that the bad regulation didn't start under Obama. We have a lot of regulations that need to be undone, but it's not just the intent. I don't argue with you that in some cases the intent of the regulation is good. The problem is the consequences are the exact opposite of the intent. And infrastructure, infrastructure spending doesn't stimulate the economy. It drains the economy of resources. Infrastructure only helps in the long run when you finish the project if it raises the productivity of the nation. But in the meantime, we are too broke. China can put in these airports because they're rich. We're broke. Before we can afford to improve the infrastructure, we need to have more serious restructuring of our economy. We have to start making stuff. We need more factories before we can start figuring out how to make our roads prettier.
You can say what you want about the stimulus bill, but I can bring a room full of people who will tell you that they were not able, if it were not for the stimulus bill, they would not have had jobs. I know that it has its effect. I think that any stimulus type of action needs to be very carefully planned. and I think it needs to be very targeted.
I mean, Mr. Cummings pointed about he can, when people get a stimulus job, he can see those jobs. Yeah, you can always see the jobs that government creates. What you don't see are the jobs that they destroyed to create those jobs. All the government can do is rearrange the resources. It doesn't create any wealth. But the problem is the jobs or the wealth that gets destroyed is more productive than whatever the government replaces it with. And so, on balance, the country is poor as a result of that. And it doesn't, the fact that if we send out a stimulus check, it's not going to stimulate the economy. If an American goes and buys some more products that were made in China, how does that help our economy? It runs up the trade deficit, and now we had to go deeper into debt to spend that stimulus check. All of that is counterproductive. And we're going to continue to repeat this mistakes. We're going to keep on throwing gasoline on this fire until we incinerate the entire country.
That was the deal. I would argue Standard & Poor's downgraded us because of the lack of the deal, the agreement addressing how serious this situation is. And to insinuate that, oh, it was because Congress had a vigorous debate, I thought that's what we're supposed to do in Congress, right?
Congress is certainly supposed to have a vigorous
yes,
debate.
Exactly.
Part of the puzzle, though, was that this Congress refused to put raising taxes, especially on the wealthy, as a part of that package. And that would have been an important way to get to the goal that S&P wanted. I mean, you sort of...
And an important way to tax the people who create jobs, too.
And that caused the crisis.
Yeah. Mr. Schiff.
It was
definitely... I'm going to get to the good doctor from Tennessee next.
Definitely the deal, not the discussion. And, with due respect, I did call the financial bubble, and I criticized S&P and Moody's and Fitch at the time for putting AAA ratings on bonds that I knew were going to go to zero. And in my opinion, S&P didn't downgrade the United States far enough. That's the problem.
Let me just say this. I've read this 50 million times. Their concern was that there were members of Congress that were going around talking about not raising the debt ceiling. That was one of their major concerns, and saying we don't have to do that. That's what
you should have done. If you didn't raise the debt ceiling, then we could have cut spending. So you said that we were paying our bills. We don't pay our bills by going deeper into debt. That's avoiding paying our bills and guaranteeing eventual default.
Let me interrupt. Do we tax too little, or do we spend too much as a government? I mean, look at our deficit.
Exactly. Relative to other countries, we are a relative low-tax country, and we are not a relative high spender.
Are we a high-spending country?
No.
We're not?
No.
Well, how did we get in this
relative
mess?
to our GDP and relative to other countries. No. I mean, I would be more than happy after this to send you a series of charts that document this.
Mr. Schiff, do you have a comment on that?
Make sure your mic's on, Mr. Schiff.
What percentage of my income should the government take? What do you think would be fair?
I'm not going to give you a number
just give me a
right
guess.
here. Yeah.
Well, what do you think would be fair? You say I'm not paying enough taxes. How high should my taxes be? What percentage of my income should be taken away from me by the government?
We have a progressive income tax
Right, but
structure.
what do you think would half? 60%, 70%? How much should they take?
Wow, well, that is so far beyond.
Well, we're going to wait. Hang on.
Let me say that taxing the rich.
The gentleman from Tennessee has the time.
Yeah, I'll just interrupt. Taxing the rich is a great idea till the rich run out of money, and that seems to be
no, my problem is I'm already almost paying
hang on a
half my income in taxes right now.
Hang on a second.
That is impossible.
No, it's not impossible.
Right.
No, it's not.
Okay, Mr. Chairman. Let's shift gears for 1 second, because this is going to go on forever. Dr. Boucher, do you feel that government, Dr. Boucher, do you feel that government jobs create revenue? And I think you said that the stimulus one had the majority of jobs created were private sector jobs. Do public jobs create revenue, or do they just cost the taxpayers money?
Recovery dollars that go on to communities to, say, build a bridge. You hire engineers, typically in the private sector, some in the public, some in the private. You hire contractors, you hire people that do concrete. You hire a lot of folks in the private sector, and then that has spillover effects. So that if you hire that person who has the concrete, and then they go and they have more money, and so they spend it in their community, that's how those private sector jobs are created, both directly and indirectly.
Mr. Schiff, do you feel that's a good return on your investment to spend those tax dollars that way? I mean, what's your chance of making a profit?
Well, first I want to point out that 99% of my income is taxed at the marginal rate. So the marginal rate is my rate. And if the Federal Government has taken 35% of my income, and then another 3% for Medicare, that's 38, and then when I have the State of Connecticut now almost 7%, over 45% of my income in tax, and that's before I pay any property taxes or sales taxes or anything else like that. And if you raise my taxes much more, that's it. I'm done. I'm already moving businesses to Singapore, moving businesses to the Caribbean to try to go to lower tax jurisdictions. We are not a low tax country. We are a high tax country, and we're a much higher tax country than we used to be in the past by far.